Hi, welcome to Week 1, Part 2, Captivate Your Reader. Okay, for this portion of Week 1, we're going to learn about our propelling event. We're going to open our treasure chest. We're going to talk about point of view. And then we're going to start writing our story. I'm very excited, and I hope you are too. This is great. Okay. To get started, we must think about one thing now. We've written our setup so far, and that's very important. We've grounded our reader in the setting. Now the next thing to actually get our story rolling is going to be our propelling event, and that's the catalyst to our story. That is extremely important. The propelling event helps your character move toward the change they need to make in their lives. This event actually kicks off the action. The propelling event in the world of our three little pigs happens when the wolf shows up and blows down the first house, that house of straw. In Reunion, the house of straw here is when Charlie's father gets them kicked out of the first restaurant. Okay? And that sets in motion a series of other restaurant events where they get kicked out of a total of 4. And those wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have been part of a pattern unless they'd first gotten kicked out of the first. And that is the propelling event. In everyday use, what happens to kick that story off is when Dee, the older daughter, arrives, and she announces first that she has a new name. That is the first step in a series of actions that begins to alienate Mama from her elder daughter and lessen the admiration that she'd always felt for her. The propelling event is very important because it starts our stories rolling. We would not have a story without a propelling event. Okay, before we write our propelling event, I want to introduce you to another concept, and this is very important. This is our treasure chest. This is the repository of our mind for all the little details that have been swirling around our head and, need to have a place to land. I don't know about you, but when I'm working on writing or a short story, the creative element happens when I'm vacuuming or when I'm dusting or when I'm cleaning the bathroom. All these things happen. I start thinking about my story. So I keep a little index card and I jot down the little details or a little scratch pad. You'll find my scribblings all over the place, and I don't want to forget those details. So I keep them together, and then I put them into now what I consider my treasure chest, which is my electronic file where I will eventually compose that story. So I'll take these details and I'll put them in this place because I want to keep them together. Now, will I use everything in my treasure chest? Not necessarily, but you'll notice that different things will build off on each other. If I pick one detail, then I'll think of others. And so a lot of these things will make it into the story. So your treasure chest should hold things like objects that will factor in the story. Everyday use had quilts, Flight had the detail of the scarf. So many things that happen, details from the setting, the weather. When Flight, the story we're going to read in our third week, when the story kicked off, she was flying into the setting sun. That was important to the story. So those are some details that may have occurred to the author early and in advance in her own treasure chest. Stories tend to resonate, and by that I mean deepen your reader engagement when objects, characters, or settings are used more than once. A note on your character. Your story for the purposes of this short story workshop is probably I recommend that you just have one primary character. You will have other supporting characters such as, in everyday use. Mama is the primary character, but Maggie and Dee are also in the story. They're not as deeply drawn as Mama is because she's the catalyst and everything in that story. So you're going to have the same things here, but you are going to need supporting characters. So you want to just put them aside. If you haven't fully drawn them out or you don't know what they look like, it's perfectly fine just to put them or a name, even just a name in your treasure chest so you can pull from it later. If Alice Walker had a treasure chest when she was writing everyday use, and I don't know that she did, but it may have had something in it like hard clay and sand, the front yard of her house. Those details come from that. Maggie, a name for the younger daughter. Her nervousness, Walker played on a lot in that story. Mama had a dream about Johnny Carson, her and Dee on the Johnny Carson show. So she may have put notes about her dream in her treasure chest that she pulled on later. Elizabeth, which is a wonderful story about Shirley Jackson. It's a lot longer than what we have room for in this class, but I encourage you to read that. That came from her collection, The Lottery, and other stories. But she had a character that was caught between two worlds in her own way. She was she was thinking she was living the dream in New York, but she actually had a very drab existence with the rain and the gray skies. But she dreamed of a tropical getaway. She wanted her life to be better than sadly that it was. And Jackson played on these two juxtaposed realities throughout the story. And I have a feeling that she stored them in her treasure chest so that she could, or something like that, so that she could go back and pull it out later. Because like I said, these stories resonate when you pull those little details out multiple times. And so, other things in your treasure chest, these could be important. Okay, a secret. What are your characters holding inside? Or what do you as the author know something that they don't know yet, right? Even in the Three Little Pigs, there was a secret. We didn't know that right away. The Three Little Pigs may have known that, but their third brother was a brick mason. Okay, this was the linchpin of the Three Little Pigs. This story was huge. This was at the climax when we found that out. And the wolf didn't win because he couldn't blow down that brick house. That's a simplistic example, but the secret in everyday use is that Maggie has higher values than Dee. Okay, and that's something that you, the reader, probably suspect. I think Mama probably knows it too, but she just doesn't want to admit it to herself. We as the reader, we see Dee's obnoxious behavior and we see Maggie's kinder and gentler nature. And these are things that's the difference between, Mama wants this great relationship with Dee, but she needs to accept that she may not have it, and she needs to appreciate her younger daughter. So that's the secret in Flight. A lot of the stories have multiple secrets. Flight certainly does. And it's okay to have more than one secret, things, and it doesn't have to be a glaringly, not like a mystery necessarily, but just a little bit of information that you hold back. It's a good thing to have this. We're going to talk about that later because it will be important. So if you have one, you want to record it in your treasure chest, put it there. If you don't, no worries. There's plenty of room for other things like backstory. Backstory is very important, okay? Backstory can come out in any place. You don't have a lot of room in a 3,000-word story to do whole big scenes or flashbacks. In fact, the new way of doing stories, contemporary stories, don't have really long backstories anymore. They don't flash back like a novel might have space to. They don't do a whole chapter. We don't have a chapter in short story for one thing, but you don't have pages and pages that you can use for a flashback. You have to do flashbacks in a matter of sentences. And it can be very, very powerful and instructive exercise to try to write histories in 2 or 3 sentences. Cheever does it very, very expertly in the first paragraph of Reunion. He says, describing Charlie's father, "He was a stranger to me. My mother divorced him 3 years ago, and I hadn't seen him since. But as soon as I saw him, I felt that he was my father, my flesh, my blood, my future, my doom." This is from the first paragraph, and he's done an awful lot there. He's characterized his father to some degree, and he's told us a little of their history. This is important. There were some great details in everyday use about the description of Mama. I mean, wonderful. Some are very humorous. But I have a feeling that Walker recorded some little things she wanted to factor in, later wrote the description. She may have included things like large, big-boned woman, flannel nightgowns to bed. She even talked later about how she would butcher a hog. So she probably put some things in there. So we get this great picture of Mama, of just this country woman, the simple country woman, and she's able to paint that because she pulls in little details like this that she may have taken from her own treasure chest. But I encourage you to have one. It'll be really, really helpful to you. Okay, now before you write your story, you may be wondering, okay, point of view. What is point of view? Point of view is nothing more complicated but the vantage point from which a story is told, okay? And in the stories we're reading, the 3 stories we're reading, we have combination. We have third person limited. We have one story, and that's Flight, that's told from third person limited from the point of view of Claire. And then we have first person point of view, which is Reunion, and then everyday use. Now, there are advantages to both types of points of views. These are some of the most popular for short stories and novels. For time immemorial, people have used this with great success. They both have advantages. They both have their drawbacks. There are 2 other points of view that can be effective, but are a little more complicated for the purposes of a shorter 3,000-word story, and that's omniscient. The omniscient point of view goes into multiple characters' heads, and this you'll see a lot in old-fashioned novels, they did that a lot. In Russian novels, they did that. And it's useful, but you've got to have a lot of words to really make your character care about all those characters. For a short story, you don't have as much time and space, so you're better off going with just one person's point of view through third or first person. There's also second person point of view, and this is a point of view, it's kind of innovative and exciting. It's used a lot for contemporary short stories, and that's told from the point of view of you. You went to the bank. You did this. You did this. It's interesting, but I think for a shorter story, a traditional story like what we're writing, I don't advise it right now. It's akin to first person in a way, and it can be used interchangeably if you're trying to experiment. But just by putting you out there, it puts distance between you and your reader. And so I don't suggest that. I recommend for these short stories, because we've got so many other elements to learn, that you stick with one of these two. These are primarily what I do. I've never written a short story under the second person point of view. I go between those two, and you only use one in a short story, but I will alternate, write a story in third person and write a story first person. It kind of depends on what I'm trying to accomplish for the character. You have to get familiar with what you want, what your comfort level is. A lot of short stories are written now in first person point of view. This is one of the most popular right now. It's trendier, but it doesn't always lend to a better story. What you can do is practice with both and see again what your comfort level is, and you'll probably go back to what you feel most comfortable writing anyway. That's my recommendation for you, is stick with what you feel more comfortable writing in, and you'll have plenty of time to practice for this. So I just wanted to point that out because we're actually going to start writing pretty soon. So beginnings, where to start? You're actually going to start writing your story at the end of this week 1. So I want to talk about where to start. Beginnings are really important. Beginnings, I call it the setup plus. You've got your character, you've got their state of mind, and you've got a physical setting. Well, you need a little something extra. And that's best expressed in openings of some stories that I'm going to share with you. Here's the beginning of Rock Springs by Richard Ford. This is a contemporary short story written in the last 10 years. Edna and I had started down from Kalispell, heading for Tampa St. Pete, where I still had some friends from the old glory days who wouldn't put the police on me. Think about what he does. He has a setting, he has a character and a minor character. He tells us where they are. They're actually in Montana. They're driving from Montana all the way to Florida, and they're doing it in a cranberry Mercedes that he has just stolen. So this is why it's really important. He's got to go down to where he has friends who won't turn him in. Okay, and this tells you a lot about this character's point of view. It tells you that right now, it shows you the advantages of using first person. You can get by with some things that you can't always with third person because you see the actual voice. And so it's a setup plus. And so if you're thinking about where do I start, and I've got you a resource in the Wet Ink module with a series of great sample beginnings. You know, when I'm trying to start writing a story, the first thing I do is look sometimes at other stories and how they got started. Something about reading the words of other authors really helps me. I don't try to imitate what they do, but I certainly would like to emulate what they do. Emulate's a better word. It says what you're learning from what they're doing. We can't ever emulate exactly Alice Walker or Marjorie Salona down there, but we can learn from what they did. Listen to these openings. These are really powerful. I will wait for in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean and wavy yesterday afternoon. A yard like this is more comfortable than most people know. It is not just a yard. And then Marjorie Salona says in her story, Counterblast, we were on the plane, Barry and I, when he put his wedding ring in his mouth and started flipping it around with his tongue. That was 6 years before the divorce. Think about the voice here. You know, these are really powerful voices, and they've given us the setup plus. They've given us a little personality. So think about that when you begin. Where should you begin? Okay. Well, you've got your story worksheet, you've got your setup, pull from your treasure box, your compelling event, your secret, all these things. These give you an idea of where to start your story. So, by the end of week 1, and your due dates for all these assignments in week 1 are within the assignments themselves in Wet Ink. But I want you to read Reunion, read all the written lectures. You need to write your premise, your setup, and prevailing event. If you can, add your secret to your treasure chest, plus some other details. That would be really helpful for you. Type it into your story worksheet, and then start typing your story, okay? And just have fun with it. Just write. I'm really good with structure, so I can help you a lot a few days after you turn it in to me through wet ink, I will get back to you with feedback that you will use when you begin, that might be helpful for you when you begin writing next week. So I'm going to leave you with some inspiration. I find it satisfying and intellectually stimulating to work with the intensity, the brevity, balance, and wordplay of the short story. I find that inspiring too. Those are words from Annie Proulx, and I hope this helps you. Okay, I look forward to seeing you in week 2. Happy writing!